I'm Stephen DeLorme. I'm a digital media director at a company called Delineator. That's my company. And basically, I'm a full-service digital content production agency. Work mostly, not exclusively with, but mostly with clients in the tech sector. I'd say if I had to group my clients into two different groups, I'd say that, you got on one hand the people who are creating software products and who need help with the creative side of things, like the marketing and the branding and the design and stuff like that. And then my other group of clients would be people who don't need help with the creative side of things because they're graphic designers, they're branding, creative agencies, people like that, and they come to me more for technical consulting and hosting and things like that. And I've made kind of an observation when dealing with these two different groups of clients. People are really afraid of DNS. Like, it really kind of trips people up a lot. A lot relies on your DNS, and that's kind of a shame that people are afraid of it. Your website relies on it. Your other website relies on it. Your client's website might rely on it if you're getting into the hosting game. Your email, maybe your client's email too. Your digital marketing tools, that's another thing we don't think about. Google Analytics, Salesforce, MailChimp, things like that probably have records in your DNS. Really almost anything can go in your DNS. I mean, you can put whatever you want there. So there's kind of a lot going on there. Problems I want to look at today, just to go ahead and let you know up front what we're getting to. Talk about migrating a website and the DNS implications of that. Losing DNS records, what happens if they get cleared out or wiped out. Security breaches related to DNS, slow page speed, and emails going to spam. So just before I go any further, I kind of want to query the room and figure out who I'm talking to here. Could you raise your hand if you identify as a developer? So probably like half the room, I'd say. Could you raise your hand if you identify as a designer? Another maybe 25% of the room. And how many of you are just, you're a business owner trying to run a website to promote your business? Okay, so even smaller portion. So it sounds like we've got very designer, developer heavy here. So I'm going to kind of keep that in mind as I go forward, but I don't want to cheat the developer people out of the really good technical information, but I also want to make sure that people who are just trying to run a business website can get what they need out of this too. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and stop me throughout. I'm happy to answer. I might defer your question until later if it's something I'm going to get to. But yeah, so let's just jump right in. What is DNS? Domain name system. That's another thing that trips people a lot, what it even stands for. According to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the domain name system is a hierarchical and decentralized naming system for computers, services, or other resources connected to the internet or a private network, ellipses. Most prominently, it translates more readily memorized domains to the numerical IP addresses. In other words, it's basically records that just tells people to computer how to get to your website or your email or something like that. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to convert example.com into that IP address right there, whatever the IP address of that website is. The domain is for humans to read, the numbers for computers to read. That's what a DNS record looks like right there. That's it like in a zone file. So yeah, pretty boring looking. But this is at a very fundamental kind of layer of the internet here, and there's not really a way to abstract this and make an easy to use WordPress plugin that can make this easier. So why we need DNS? Back in the day, there was a hosts file. It existed on ARPANET. It was managed by a guy named John. I don't know what his name was. I actually, to be honest, I don't even know if his name was John. He was a guy. He probably had a name. He basically was responsible for managing the hosts file. And it became a lot for him to maintain because essentially this file was a text document, and you'd have here the IP address, and then you'd have over here what the server that went to was. So as universities on ARPANET are spinning up new servers, spinning up new computers, you have to add stuff to the host file. I say spin up. Yeah, no, they didn't spin up servers back then. Jesus. Anyways. I mean, there was kind of a process of like manually building the thing. But yeah, that became a lot to maintain. DNS kind of solved that problem of having to update this hosts file of like what all the different servers are. And it's kind of like just taking the host file and just putting it on the internet. But it's a lot more scalable than a hosts file because a host file is basically just like this IP address, this computer. DNS is like, if you want to access this domain name and you want the website, go to this IP. If you want the email, go to this IP. If you want the, you can basically route different things to different services depending on what you're trying to do. So that's kind of why it's the modern alternative to the hosts file. Understanding your DNS configuration is going to be different for everybody because, again, there's so many different ways you can do this, whether you're going through your registrar or your host or however. So there's kind of some groundwork we need to lay first before you can really get to understanding it. I'm going to go through a couple key terms right here real quick. Registrar. Your registrar is essentially the company, the organization, whatever, that registers the domain for you. I think of them kind of like a notary. It's like you can't always just get your friend to witness a document for you. You need like a legally registered notary in order to witness it for you. That's kind of how I think about the registrar. So they register the domain on your behalf. Nameservers. Nameservers are, so an important thing to think about with nameservers is that there's like millions of them all across the world. I don't know, I pulled that stat out of nowhere, but there's a lot of them, right? And the only ones that really correspond directly to your website or your name server. So you probably have between 1 and 4 name servers for your domain name, just depending on how it's set up. Let's see. Then the next kind of thing I want to find is a host. Again, this is another kind of point that people get tripped up. It's basically where your website lives. And another thing we could be talking about in this context too is a service provider, like like MailChimp or something like that, or Google or any kind of email service. So you got your registrar, which registers the domain. You got your name servers, which host your DNS records and tell people and computers how to get there. And then you have your host or your service providers, which is the ultimate destination of all of this. Ultimately, this is going to be an IP address right here. That's what we're really talking about when we talk about a host or service provider. We're talking about an IP address. DNS resolution is the process of basically converting the domain into an IP address. And it's kind of an in-depth process. It just happens so quickly we don't even think about it anymore. But you type in example.com and it resolves it and it gets an IP address. It's going to go through several hops to get there. First thing it's going to do is it's going to check the browser's local cache. So if you visited this website before, then your IP address is probably already stored in your browser's cache, and it doesn't need to do the lookup again. The next thing you could do is it could check your ISP's cache. So I think, Clear, is that what people use in Greenville? Comcast, Xfinity, anything. Your ISP is basically like one of these, right? They're going to have their own DNS server, and they're going to have DNS records for frequently visited websites cached there. So the next thing that your browser can do is check with the DNS name server that goes through your ISP and get the IP address of the website you're trying to go to there. If your ISP does not have it, then it's going to have to go to the .com name server, assuming we're going to example.com. It's a really hot website. I mean, it's just like, they've been around for like 20 years in Wikipedia articles and examples all around the world. They're example.com. At then point, the .com name server is going to send it to example.com, and then it's finally going to get an IP address. So just to illustrate real quickly, I'm the laziest speaker ever. I couldn't even prepare these images in advance for you. I'm sorry. So this is a laptop.
Is it Mac or Windows?
It's Mac, because that's what globe-trotting entrepreneurs do, right? They have Macs. Okay, so you got your browser cache right here, right? B for browser. Okay, it's going to do a lookup here. It's going to say, hey, give me the IP address for example.com. It's going to bounce back, no, I don't have that. Okay? So then the next thing it's going to have to do is it's going to have to go to the ISP's cache over here. Lines indicate records, I guess. It's a really packed document. And then the ISP is like, nope, I don't have it. Really, in most cases, they do have it because you're probably not the very first person in existence to visit this website. But just, hypothetically, bear with me. Okay, so then next thing it's going to have to do is it's going to go to the .com name server. I'm going to go ahead and pre-draw these. And then this is going to be example.com right here. They really revolutionized the world of the World Wide Web in the 90s because they were the first company to take the word example and rotate it by 45 degrees. And then I'm tired of writing IP addresses already. So it goes to the computer. It says, hey, give me the address of the example.com. It bounces back, no, I don't have that, but you should try the example.com name servers, which are probably something like ns1.domaincontrol.net, ns2.domaincontrol.net, something to that effect, right? So then it's going to go to example.com's name servers. Example.com is going to say, hey, I know where that guy's located. It's at 205.76.x scribble scribble. Then you know the IP address, then it can go directly there. So once the DNS lookup has happened, it really just happens once during your session visiting that website. So like in most situations, honestly, like if you've visited a website before, the hop is going to end right here. You're going to have the IP address just from the browser cache. If you're the first person in your area of the country to visit this website, or the second, I should say, you'll probably get it from, or anything after that, you'll get it from the ISP. So Clear or Xfinity will just hand down that DNS record to you. But if you are the first person to visit this website in this region, you're going to have to go through all these extra hops to get to the name server there. And that adds like milliseconds to the page load. So that's kind of how a DNS resolution works right there. And just important to remember that that's going on in the background pretty much every time you go to a website. If you want to have kind of an interactive example, if anyone's got their laptop open, what you can do is you can do dig plus trace, and then let's say 2020.wordcamp. No, that's not how it goes. Greenville. Dot. Okay, and so we're basically forcing it through all of the different hops here, but it went like up here. I'm not going to pretend like I understand all of this. I'm not a computer scientist, but essentially this would be it going to the main .org name servers up there, and then these right here would be. Here's the .org name servers, so these are something else up here. Here's the .org name servers that it's checking. Here's WordPress.org's name servers. Apparently they have so many websites that they run their own name servers. ns3.wordpress.org. So that's the thing, is like most of you probably don't own your own name servers. You're probably using somebody else's name servers, which is fine. But like when you're a really big organization or a really big company, you probably start running your own name servers. And then down here is spit out the final IP address for it, 198.143. Yada yada. So if I give myself two hands, I can say ping-c for 2020.greenville.wordcamp.org and hope I didn't make a typo. And you can see it's pinging the IP address. It's pinging the same IP address that we just got back in the DNS lookup there. So that's just a way of checking to validate my assumptions about all that techno gibberish. All right, I'm gonna go back to my slide deck here. Look at some slides, everybody. Cool. That's DNS resolution. So there's different types of configurations depending on like how yours is set up. I'm going to tell you all about those different types after I take a sip of water. Cool, done. So this is the most common one. It's combined registrar, name servers, and host. Like this is, I'd say, probably the most common. An example of this would be if TacoHost offers to host your WordPress website for you for, nice flat rate of $10 a month, and they're going to throw in a free domain name for you. So what TacoHost is doing there is they are, does my clicker want to work, registering the domain name for you, okay? They're providing the name servers for your DNS records, and they're hosting your website for you. And it's supposed to like, there we go. So that's fairly common. Who in here thinks that they have that? You? Yeah, so you have that. So it's pretty common. As you go through these, think about if any of these apply to you, because they probably are going to. Another example would be if a registrar provides the name servers for you, and then you have a separate host. So an example of that is like, let's say you go to a company called Domain Salad, you buy a domain from them, then they're going to give you the name servers, and then you're going to host your site with TacoHost. So you really have two companies involved here. You're paying one company to register the domain for you. You're paying another company to host it for you. Domain Salad is the one registering it. They're providing the name servers, but TacoHost is hosting the site. Another kind of similar example to that would be registrar is pointing to the host, but your host is providing the name servers for you. So an example of this would basically be the same as before. We're just using somebody else's name servers. So Domain Salad is registering the domain for you, but you're pointing to TacoHost's name servers, and then the TacoHost name servers are pointing to your TacoHost hosting account. Just to illustrate this for you, because I know some people are more visual, and I confuse myself with this techno jib-jab. So like in the first example here, this is a registrar, this is a domain registration. I'm pretty sure about that. Okay, these right here, this is a DNS record, a name server, as we call it in the business. Doop, doop, doop. Okay, and then this is a hosting box. It hosts example.com. So the way to think about it is that in the first example, this would have been all one company. All three of these things are essentially being provided to you by the same company. In the example that I just gave, this here and this here would have been the domain registrar, and this would have been the host. But in this example, it's the other way around. So this right here is all being provided by TacoHost. This right here is being provided by Domain Salad. And so you got to remember, when we're doing a DNS lookup, the user is having to basically check the registration, then check the name servers, then go to the website. So it's kind of how it happens in that order. Final kind of configuration that I can think of would be if we had these, basically these three different things with three different companies. So this example, we're throwing a new company into the mix. They're called Cake DNS. They provide really fast, premium DNS services. So Domain Salad is registering the domain for you. Then on the registration, you're pointing the name servers to Cake DNS's name servers. And then the DNS records that Cake DNS has is pointing to TacoHosts, which hosts your website. So you have three of them. I'll go ahead and say that this is kind of an advanced configuration that's not really for everybody. It's my personal favorite out of the four. because it just provides you with a lot more flexibility and a lot better performance. But if it's going to confuse you, then probably don't do it. But this is a good option for like businesses where the website is like a really important part of their business. I'm not talking about just like, oh, it's just a landing page with my email address on it. I'm talking about like if you're running an e-commerce store and like 100% uptime is really important. Having to be real fast so that people can buy lots of orders any time of day, then that's probably the better option.
Why does this give you better performance than, say, registering with the domain and name servers that Namecheap and having site hosted?
Yeah, so he asked why does this give you better performance than just registering your domain at somewhere like Namecheap or somewhere and then just using their name servers. So to be honest, I can't give you a great answer for that because I'm not a network manager and I don't know exactly what goes on in the data centers and the network switches of these companies. What I will say is that from what I understand, companies that provide really good DNS services, that's like most of what they do. And I'm not going to like endorse any of these, but just name off a few like Cloudflare, Amazon Web Services, Route 53, things like that. That's like those services are just, you're paying just for really good DNS. And I've witnessed, when using third-party DNS providers on my own, I've witnessed an increase in performance. Like, I won't name any hosts, but I've had situations where domain registrars and hosts, I'll go and I'll change the domain, the DNS record, to point to a new server, and I'll be waiting 24 hours for it to propagate around the world. And I know that's supposed to be, like, that's what you tell your clients, oh, it'll take 24 hours to propagate. But when you're using a really good managed, like a third-party DNS provider, it's like 2 minutes. Like I go to run a check, and I will show you how to run a check to check propagation. When I go to run a propagation check, like they're all fully propagated before I even run the check. It's crazy. So like it just propagates faster if you're running servers. Another advantage to using a third-party server is that, and I'll get to more of this later, but security. A lot of times they can protect you from denial of service attacks better. But I'm going to get to more of that later in the security section. What a DNS record looks like. I'm going to turn that thing off, get that mouse out of the way for you. This is the most common one right here. It's an A record. This is what we call a zone file here. It doesn't actually have all this kind of stuff up here. I just put that there to illustrate, but it's basically like you have a name, you have an IP address, and that's a comment. Same way if you're writing HTML or PHP or CSS, you put a comment in the code. That's what they look like in a zone file. They have a semicolon. Good news, no one's ever going to have to touch this unless they want to get like really geeky about it. Because most of your domain providers nowadays just give you a little box where you type in the name, you type in the IP address, and you're done. So I'm showing you this just more for educational purposes, but in most cases, you're going to have a box where you type that in, and you're going to have a box where you type that in. Simple as that. And this example right here, the @ is example.com, so that's the root of the domain. We're saying example.com goes to 172.134. And we're saying we're creating a subdomain here called employees.example.com. And because they both point to the IP address, we can assume they're both hosted on the same server. If we look at this one, though, store has a different IP address, so we can assume that this subdomain, store.example.com, is going to be on a different server somewhere. And an example of where you have this in the real world. Let's say example.com sets up their main website. It's a WordPress website. They spin up a second employee HR portal running some kind of HR WordPress theme. Surely an HR theme must exist, right? I don't know. And then they're like, you know what? I'm hating on WooCommerce. I'm going to go with Shopify. So they open up a Shopify account under store.example.com. And so that's Shopify's IP. That's an example of why that would be set up that way.
So
Yeah.
in your example, you would point your site host to the Nameservers at KDNS. Namecheap would associate the KDNS servers with
Yeah, I can show you that. Let me just draw that out real quick. I'm going to back up. He asked a question about the third-party name servers again. So about how that would actually be set up. So let me go ahead and try and draw that out. So essentially, you would have your registration, and this registration, put an R by it, the registration would be edited at the Namecheap website. So I'm just going to go ahead and write Namecheap on there. So, and this would be where like you're like, oh, your administrative details, administrative content, you know, they take your address and all that kind of stuff. This is the same place you'd edit all that. And I don't know what it's going to look like on their website, but somewhere in the user portal, they're going to have a place where you adjust your name servers. And your name servers, assuming we're using Cake DNS, they're probably going to say, you know, send it to ns1 dot, you know, hope Cake DNS isn't a real company. I'll tell you what, Taco Host sure is. They're actually sponsoring this WordCamp next year. Talk to Kathy about it. So you'd point it to their DNS servers, and then the Cake DNS servers would, it's pink now, whatever. It's pink because it's cake. This would be their records here, right? And this is where your A record would go, here. So that would be like your IP address, your, you know, the stuff we were just looking at on the next slide. So your A record, your MX record, all your email stuff, that would all go there and be edited through Cake DNS's website. And then you'd have your actual hosting account, whatever hosting company you're using, and this would be the IP address. Whatever IP you put there, that would be the IP address of your hosting company. Does that kind of answer the question? Uh-huh. So we've looked at our A records. We've got our MX records right here. Your MX record is like, you know, just going to depend on what email service you're using. If you're using an email provider that just has one server, you're going to get a single IP address like that. If you're using multiple, if you're using like Gmail or something like that, they're going to give you a ton of different servers to put, depending on just like how it's set up. So that's an MX record. Those can get very complicated, and it's going to depend just on who you're getting your email through, really. I'm going to start moving through some of these a little bit quicker because I want to get to more of the problems and solutions, and I don't want to spend too long on this. But you got your CNAME record. This is basically just like, instead of pointing to an IP address, you're pointing to a subdomain. So like if I was going to host something on GitHub Pages, I would, and I want it to be demo.example.com, I would point it to the domain of my GitHub account, spddesign.github.io, and it would just go directly there. So the important thing to remember when you're using a CNAME is that there's two DNS lookups. There's the lookup to find the CNAME, but then it has to do another DNS lookup on that right there. It ultimately has to get to an IP address. And CNAMEs can be very useful so that you're not having to type in the same IP address over and over again. But the problem with a CNAME that can mess you up is when people daisy chain them too much, and they're like, you know, like let's say I have mail.example.com or mail.example.com CNAMEd to that. Well, if I changed the IP address to that, it would also change the IP address to that. So you have to be real cautious. They can be a time-saving tool, but if you're not careful, your daisy chains can mess stuff up when you change the IP address to something. TXT records, this can be anything. So this is like, essentially, it's text. Not like sending a text message, like plain text. And the idea is like, you use this for stuff like Google gives you a site verification code so that they know that, like for Google Analytics, they know you on the site. Outlook might give you something for SPF records. I just put potato in mine. No joke, if you run a DNS lookup on my domain name, d.elo.ma, I put potato in there, just because it's not gonna hurt anything. There's no service on the face of the earth that's gonna respond to the fact that I have potato in my DNS records, but it's not gonna hurt anything, so. Cool. Now I want to get into like the problems and the solutions, because this is probably going to be a good meaty part for a lot of you, particularly if you've had these problems. One problem I see clients having a lot is migrating websites. I know that's an issue that just the thought of it kind of disturbs people, and it's always like, oh, we have to plan for downtime and all that kind of stuff. And that can be especially bad if you have like a store or something and you don't want to lose sales. Solution's actually very simple. You can actually have a no downtime migration. I mean, don't promise anybody on it just in case it messes up, but you can really have a no downtime migration. It's real simple. You set up a subdomain, you stage your site to the subdomain, then you repoint the main domain to the subdomain. And I'll show you how to do that step by step. First thing you do, you go into your DNS records, whether that's your registrar or your third-party provider or whatever. You create a subdomain. So say I want to move example.com to a new server. I got tired of Taco Host. So I'm going to set up a subdomain called staging.example.com. It's going to point to the IP address of the new server here, 164.whatever. Okay. Move. Thing. I just got this clicker the other day, and like I've noticed weird things by like if there's like radio frequency, it like really responds to like which way you're pointing it. So it just depends. Next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna create a clone. So on that new server I'm talking about, on staging.example.com, your brand new server, you're gonna make a clone of your of your old WordPress website. This can be done a number of ways. You can copy the files, you can copy the database. If you're an advanced developer type user, you probably already know how to do that. If you don't know how to do that, there are plugins you can get that will help you generate clones of your WordPress websites, but the point is just clone it. So you now have two websites. You have example.com and you have staging.example.com. And if everything goes right, the staging site should exactly match the example website. If it doesn't, then you can dive in there and you can fix the problem on the staging server and no one will see it. That's the beauty of this. Once you're satisfied with the staging site and you like the way staging.example.com works, go back into your DNS records, take the IP address of the staging server, and move it to the primary domain's A record. And then the primary domain's A record will point to the new server. What you can do is you can go into a shell and run the command dig example.com A, or you can just go to what'smydns.net. It's a free service this guy set up. It's really cool. Basically, you just go in there, you type in your domain name, and what it's going to do is it's going to ping like 10 random DNS name servers around the world and check to see what IP address it's going to. And it'll tell, like, you can just look at it and be like, okay, it's still pointing to the old server. Or you can say, hey, it's pointing to the new server. And then if it's pointing to the new server, then you're good to go. You're done for the day. Did I see a hand somewhere? Okay, cool. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye and I wasn't sure. So that's pretty much how you can do a zero downtime migration, and it's just really about kind of setting it up in a staging environment first. I'll go ahead and say there might be something you need to do on your hosting account first. Hey, what's up?
Did you show the how you can check and see if your site's propagated?
Yeah, so I'm just going to open up What's My DNS. I think they're putting some link up on the website or whatever that's got everyone's like slide notes and all that. They'll certainly tweet it out, but I think, yeah, there we go. Going on my phone today. So this is the easiest way to do it. Like I said, you can certainly do it in a terminal if you want, but this is a really easy way to do it. So if I just go and like type in my personal website. And I can choose a box here, and I can say, like, what's the A record, what's the MX record, whatever. I can search for whatever kind of record I want. And you see it just generated a list here of all the different servers. This one didn't respond, so that server in Brazil is down, but everyone else is up. And it gives me the IP address. And if it isn't propagated, like when you first change the record, you're probably going to see most of these with the old IP address, and like only one of them is going to have the new one. And then if you wait 5 minutes, like 90% of these are going to be the new one. And then if you check it like a day later, they should all be clean. So that's an invaluable tool, which is why I like to tip that person in PayPal or whatever, because they provide it for free and it's pretty useful. It makes my job a lot easier. Another issue that you can have is lost records. And like this is the kind of thing that does not happen every single day. So Like, I don't want to get into like some fear-mongering thing here. It's probably not going to happen to you, but if it does, the results are disastrous. I'm talking about like if, like, let's say your credit card, something messed up with your credit card, your domain or hosting account didn't renew automatically, and they flushed your DNS records. Or let's say your host messes something up. Unlikely, but it happens. People are human. Or somebody hacks your zone file, whatever. If all your DNS records got deleted, you'd be in a situation where you'd have to find out what that stuff is. And the solution is real simple. You just got to back it up. And I mean, if you're really technical, you can actually go into your domain registrar site. You can actually copy the text of the zone file. Or if you're not technical, just go in there and take a screenshot. Simple as that. If you do have to replace the DNS records, you're going to have to type everything in from that screenshot. But at least you have a screenshot that tells you what everything is supposed to be. And to point out how bad this is, like your website, I'm not just talking about your website going down, I'm talking about your company email could go down too if something happened to your DNS records. And you're like, okay, well, I'll just call my email provider and figure out what the records need to be. Except that they want you to verify with your company email, which is tied to your DNS records, which you can't, you see how this could be a huge problem. You could lose access to Google Analytics, Salesforce, all your different stuff. So keep that stuff backed up. Do you have a question?
No,
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Just mention why,
Yeah. So, and like, seriously, if your eyes are glazing over at everything I'm saying, just please take away at least this one point. Back up your DNS records so that you have them just in case you need it. It's not like an insurance policy you have to pay every single month. It's like you just do it once and you're set. So another problem worth pointing out is a security breach. What I'm talking about here is somebody who has access to your DNS records going into your domain registrar account or your DNS account and changing the records to point somewhere else. And if you want, you can click that article there and you can go to a Wired article about how, of all people, WikiLeaks got DNS hijacked, which is kind of funny because, they're supposed to be like, really cypherpunk. But, and there's some inaccuracies in their article here and there. But by and large, it's a thing that happens. And it even happens to them. And this can just be as simple as somebody having access to your account, maybe somebody and then they change the record and point it somewhere else. So the solution is really just basic security hygiene. I'm talking about don't just give out your password all willy-nilly. That's a technical term. Make sure you control who has access to this kind of stuff. Because you got to think about how easy this would be. Imagine if your company is a store. You have an e-commerce store. You process credit card transactions. I'm the web developer you hired 3 years ago, but you forgot about me, but I still have a password to your account. So I log in. Don't be afraid of your web developer. I'm not trying to soak pain, but I'm just saying, let's say my computer gets hacked or something like that. And somebody gets access to the password to your DNS registrar, which is stored on my computer. So they log in there, they see that you're running an e-commerce store. So they change the IP address of your website in the DNS record to point to a website they manage. Then people type in your website, they think they're going to your website, they're going to somebody else's website. They've scraped all of the CSS from your website so it looks exactly the same. And they're entering their credit card info into some hacker's website. It can happen. Again, it's not the kind of thing that happens every day, but when it happens, it's really bad. So what I mean by basic security hygiene, if you need to give somebody access to access your domain or your DNS, try to delegate it instead of giving them the password. I'm not trying to make you afraid of working with designers and developers. I'm a designer developer. I want you to work with me. But think about Google Drive. You don't give somebody your Google account. You right-click, you share the document with them. So if your host or your domain has the ability to say, hey, please grant access to this email address, please do that instead, because then you can revoke that access later on. If you can't do that, use an encrypted messaging app like Signal or Proton Mail or something like that to send sensitive information to people. If you don't do that, you can use some kind of expiring or exploding message. Basically what I mean is there are services like password managers and stuff that will let you send a message to somebody through a link in the browser that will disappear after 7 days or however long you set it. Again, this makes it so it's not sitting around on someone's laptop for 5 years, whereby it gets stolen and falls into the wrong hands. You can't do that, then just send it through different channels. So like email somebody, hey, this is the username to my GoDaddy account, and then text them the password. So that way it's not in it's in two different places. And like somebody can't just like, a hacker can't get to it necessarily as easily. Also, when they're done, change the password. Like if you haven't worked with your web developer in a year, change the password to your account. Maybe they don't need it. It's not saying that you don't trust them, you might not trust someone who maliciously takes their information. So again, I'm not saying don't have friends and don't trust people, just be careful. What's up?
I just wanted to add, if you are going to do the separate channels, make sure that you don't label what you're sending.
That's a good point. She said if you're going to send out different channels, make sure you don't label what you're sending. Don't label it as this is the account to my website. Maybe call them on the phone and say, hey, I'm texting you a random password or something like that. The phone conversation won't linger. Unless the NSA is targeting you, in which case all your conversations are being reported. But that's probably outside of the threat model of most small business owners. You never know, it depends on the business. Anyways, I don't want to milk that joke too far. Okay, problem, site too slow. Yeah, I mean, look, honestly, page speed, I feel like that was like the topic of 2019. Like, I feel like every other talk was great, and I learned a lot of good stuff, about that kind of stuff. And, in my experience, it's usually the host. There's a lot of things, like page speed is a hugely dense topic. There's a lot of details, and I don't want to pin it on one just thing. Usually, in my experience, the most common thing is someone's just using a really slow host. But the DNS just adds to that. Like, if you're dealing with a host that has really slow servers or that has too many people crammed onto a single box, you have to be careful because they might also have, really busy and packed name servers as well. So one thing you can do is speed up by switching to a third-party provider. And that's really all I had to say about that, is just that like they, again, offloading it to a professional DNS provider can speed things up. And it's not going to speed up the speed of that person's host. It's not going to make their WordPress theme more efficient. It's not going to make their JavaScript quicker to execute. It's not going to compress the size of their images. But assuming you've solved all of those other problems for page speed, this can shave off, a couple of milliseconds, depending in terms of getting people there. So if you're running a store and a website that's very business and where speed and getting people there quickly is really important, good DNS is important. And also, to bring back to what I was talking about earlier, is a lot of times third-party DNS providers can prevent DDoS attacks. So in a situation where, like, let's say there's an organized group of cyber criminals that is trying to basically create a distributed attack. It stands for distributed denial of service, in case you weren't aware. Basically, a DDoS attack is when they try to just flood your website with too many requests, shuts you down. It happened to PayPal a couple years back, like 10 years ago, and it happened to some other big company recently, I forget who, but it happens. So a third-party DNS provider has the ability to stop that before it even hits the server. So another problem, email going to spam. And I know somebody in here, I think, was asking me about this before the talk. So I know this, I'm probably getting close to the end here because I got to wrap up before the next talk. But I want to try and go into this as much as I can. This is a problem I hear of a lot, which is, do you have a question? Oh, somebody. Sorry, I thought I saw a hand. My bad. I get this a lot because people set up a WordPress website. It's really easy, and then none of their emails are going to where they should be going to. They're going to the junk folder, or maybe they're even getting quarantined at the mail server. And that can happen a lot of the time just because the DNS isn't configured properly to handle the email. Solution is basically using your DNS records to add SPF to basically declare yourself as a valid sender of email. And to be more clear, what I'm talking about is like you set up a WordPress website. you set up the WordPress website, you add a contact form, say contact form 7 or something like that. You say when a customer fills out this form, it should go to, you know, Jill's email address. And it doesn't. It goes to her spam folder, or it never even makes it there to begin with. And the reason why is just because, like, let's say the company, let's say Jill's company uses like Outlook 365 for their email. All their emails hosted in the Microsoft cloud. So when any mail provider on the face of the earth sees another IP address sending as Jill's example.com, it's like, hey, that might be spam. Because that's the thing. If I want to take anyone's domain name in this room, if I took your domain name, I could send an email as your domain name. Like there's no authentication necessary. All I got to do is be like, yep, I'm so-and-so.com. I swear, I promise. You really don't have to do any kind of authentication. You just got to say that you're that domain. So these kind of blocks are in there for a good reason. So what you would do, this is an example of SPF protection right here. So it's added as a text record, and I'd say SPF1 include protection.outlook.com, include salesforce.com, and include 210.56.whatever. So what this means with this DNS record is I want my example.com for mail. I want Microsoft Outlook to be a valid sender of that mail. Okay. I want Salesforce to be a valid sender of that mail so that, you know, my sales reps can, you know, send out, you know, bulk automated emails and spam everybody. And then I want this server right here to be able to send out mail. And what this is depends on who you are. You know, I've had situations where a client has like, you know, I've got a computer in the warehouse and it's tied to a machine and it needs to be able to email out reports every time the machine goes down or something like that. So maybe that's the IP address of that machine, you know. Honestly, the majority of you are probably just going to have that. Like if you're using Outlook, you're probably just going to have that. But the bigger your business is, the more complicated it is, the more SPF records you might need. So you can actually add the IP address of your WordPress site into the SPF record, and that should clear it up. You can also add a DCAM key, and I pronounce it DCAM. I don't know if everyone else does. It's like digital key identified mail, something to that effect. Essentially what it is it's a cryptographic exchange. What it does is there's like a public key, a private key. The server sending the mail has a private key. The public key is published in your DNS records. So what that means is that every mail that gets sent out is digitally signed so that anybody receiving the mail can say, oh, this is a digitally signed message. Let me make sure the signature is valid. So they go to the DNS records, they look for a text record that has the DCAM key in there, and they check the public key to make sure that it's a valid signature. It's hard to find a real world analogy to explain this. I'm sure someone smarter than me has already published a YouTube video, you know, using Kool-Aid as an analogy or something, but you know, those crazy cryptographers. But that's essentially what it does. It just is a way of proving that that the correct server signed it. If you're using Microsoft Mail, they have a tutorial in their documentation that will tell you how to set up DCAM on your Microsoft server and on your DNS. Salesforce does it, I know. If you're doing WordPress, like let's say you're running your own Linux box, you're running WordPress on cPanel, you can set up DCAM in cPanel, I think, I'm pretty sure. Fact check that. You can also just use a third-party provider if you want, which is probably what most people are going to do, which is like totally cool. I do it. You use a third-party mail service. There's a lot of them out there. Mailgun, SendGrid, Amazon SES, whatever, take your pick, but there's a lot of them out there. And the idea is you're basically offloading your mail to them, so they're sending the mail instead of your WordPress website. There's some extra plugins you're going to need to do to install this, but they're going to do the exact same thing though. If you use SendGrid, if you use Amazon SES, whatever, they're going to say you need to go into your DNS records, you need to publish an SPF record, you need to publish a DCAM key, and you need to put in all this other random gibberish that I don't know what means. And that's going to happen. What's up? I would say so, but at the same time, let me put it this way. his question was, is your deliverability going to be higher with a third party? The question is, the long answer is it depends. The short answer is yes. The long answer being that, like, a lot of times they're going to tell you how to modify your DNS. Like, they're going to tell you, put in this SPF record, type in this DCAM key. And there's no room for error because they're going to give you something to copy and paste, and they're going to tell you exactly what to type in. I think a lot of times for people, they just don't know how to do that stuff, and that's fair. Like, you could do all of this on your own mail server if you wanted, but I mean, it's hard, you know? So like, if you knew what you were doing, you could probably do the exact same SPF and DCAM thing on your own, but they'll make it completely foolproof for you by telling you exactly what to type in. Another advantage too is just that they work hard to make sure that their servers are whitelisted so that the IP address can't be blacklisted. In my experience, it's usually that you just need SPF and DCAM records. But you know, there are occasional things where, like, let's say you're on shared hosting and there's 20 other WordPress websites on the same box, and one of them is some spam phishing artist, and they get the whole IP address blacklisted. I mean, it can happen. So, you know, it just kind of depends. But in general, I'd say a third party is definitely a great option to go with. I think that's about all I really got here. Those are, again, just like the major problems I see, and hopefully I'm able to shed some light on it, and I'm open to questions now. Sup?
Well, I was just going to respond to him. I use SendGrid all the time, primarily as a diagnostic tool. I think it does increase deliverability, but when your client calls and says, I'm not getting an email, or my whatever, comes to my website is not getting delivered, it tells you where it's based. That's almost impossible to figure out on your.
Yeah, I agree with that. What's up? CNAME flag. I don't understand. Flag. Flat. I don't know what you mean by that. I know what a CNAME is, but I don't know what CNAME. I don't know what you mean. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, CNAMEs, I mean, that's essentially, CNAMEs in general are just the idea that you don't use an IP address with a CNAME. You instead of pointing something to an IP address, you're pointing it to another domain, essentially. I'm happy to discuss this. This sounds like this is part of a longer conversation, because I guess I'm not sure the context of what you're trying to do is all.
Is that what you're using CDN about there?
Yeah.
So you're pointing to their, to Cloudflare, basically,
Yeah, you can point to Cloudflare with a CNAME. You can point. Yeah, I mean, you can point to them with whatever you need to. But yeah, CNAME's an option. So. What's up? When it? Oh, okay. Cool. Well, if you guys need to find me, that's my website right there. There I am on Twitter. If anyone's on Keybase, that's where I'm at. And yeah, we're good. Thank you, guys.